there is really a very little known incident which probably nobody cares much about, but it proves some points, and that was that quite early in the career of both Freud and Jung, when they knew each other already, so there was already a sort of some esoteric influence flowing toward Vienna from Zurich. Jung and Freud became aware of another Viennese doctor who was also a psychiatrist and was thought very highly of Freud, and his name was Herbert Silberer. I've been racking my octogenarian, nonagarian by now brain all afternoon to remember his name. Anyway, Herbert Silberer was a Viennese doctor, and he was thought very highly of Freud, being in Vienna and so forth. And then he decided to write a book. Well, that was a mistake on the part of Dr. Silberer, because the book was ostensibly, by way of its time, was a book on alchemy, which of course can be a very, very important subject. But in the book of alchemy, right at the beginning, and you can't find it now, it was only published once in German. When you take a look at the book, you'll find that Dr. Silberer, right at the beginning, says that this is a time when the Gnostic Sophia, and he called them by both names, the Gnostic Sophia is returning, and is going to be a new age under the auspices of Sophia, and that is why he wrote the book. Well, unfortunately, he was apprenticed to Freud rather than to Jung, and Freud got really nasty about it. And he really bawled him out in a very unbecoming manner. And Freud was generally a fairly well-mannered man. But anyway, he told him that to bring in Gnostics and Sophia, and it is alchemy he might have stood, but not going back that far. And this was a bad way for psychoanalysts to do, and that he was not a good psychoanalyst, that he misunderstood the teachings. So pretty nasty answer he gave him. Well, Silberer was crushed. He went home and he killed himself. So, which is what psychoanalysts do when the head psychoanalyst disapproves of them. So that was a pretty sad business. The only person who seemed to remember that and bring it up from time to time, however, was C.G. Jung. And he didn't bawl out Freud, but he basically told him that the way he treated Silberer was terrible, and that Silberer was a martyr. So you can't be much more clear than that. In any event, what Silberer wrote was really that the Gnostic Sophia from olden times is returning, and that there will be an age of Sophia. And that being the case, he wrote this particular book, which was ostensibly about alchemy. I shouldn't really say too much about it, because I never read the book, and I think there are only a few copies left in some library in Vienna or so forth. So I can't really say too much about the content of Silberer's book, but I know that it existed, and I know that there was this unfortunate incident occasioned by Freud, and that much of it was not forgotten till later times. Now, all right, that being the case, that I brought that up primarily because that indicates that at a very early time, really, because this was when Freud and Jung only just knew each other, so this was very early after 1900 that Silberer wrote that book. So that it's useful to remember that there were people in the early psychoanalytic community who had a good deal of knowledge of and liking for Gnosticism, and who even came up with this, shall we say, prediction, which later on in an entirely different way Jung was engaging in, namely that indeed there was a return of Sophia and a Sophianic Age. Now we got to take another jump to somewhere at a later time, namely to Jung himself. Now, as you know, Jung sort of led in a literary sense a double life for a long, long time. Because on the one hand, he wrote, a fantastic number of his own books, which, by the way, are now going to be expanded. I just spoke to a friend of mine who is in with these circles in Zurich, and he said that they are working on and they are about to publish under a somewhat different name, not the collected. Maybe the earlier one was the collected writings, and this is the collected works, but an edition of Jung's writings, which is almost twice as long as the 16 volumes or something that are available now. So it's rather strange, But anyway, that's coming out. It will contain all the footnotes. It will contain reference notes of various kinds and editorial material. And Dr. Shamdasani, who edited the Red Book, is its editor. So they are working on it now. I rather doubted that at my age I will see it published. But I promised Dr. Shamdasani, who is a darling man, when I tell him, if I am able to, from the other world, I'll come and read it. So put the books out somewhere where I can get to them, will you? So in any event, in the Red Book, which of course has been out now. What was the year we went to Budapest? 2009. 2009. The Red Book, which was published in 2009, and which ever since then has been a great success, we find a very interesting document. I'll bring I have several copies of the big folio-sized Red Book, which is really red in the cover. So I will bring, I have two in English, and I have one in German, and then I have the small traveling edition. So I have a lot of them. But let us say I will bring the faultless first edition, first one, and there I will open up the book and show you, and we'll put it out here, of the pictorial prophecy, shall we say, made by Jung, who was quite an artist and who has dozens of big, beautiful paintings as, the big pictures in the Red Book. They are all painted, designed and painted by Jung. And one of them is, I don't know whether they even mention it in the book, but that is obviously to anyone who looks at it for a minute or two, it is a picture of the return of Sophia. So should I describe it to you now and then bring it to you next week? Well, who knows, you might be going to Saudi Arabia or something by then. But in any event, you will see it. Jung was really quite an artist. I always protested against that because I said Jung was a prophet. And the prophet's prophecy comes forth in writing, in picture, in sound, in music, in all kinds of things. So, yes, among many other things, he was also an artist. So Jung's painting of the return of Sophia is a temple, the inside of a temple. It's really more like a Jewish temple or any kind of Middle Eastern mosque with you see it with round roof and all that. Very, very beautiful. And in the middle of the temple, you can see that having come just down through the roof, as it were, is this magnificent statue of Sophia. So there is a beautiful and very majestic feminine figure who is obviously a Sophia, and Jung owned up to it later on, in the middle of the chapel or the temple. And then the temple is full of people. And I thought, oh well, maybe he's just predicting that this will be a matter of great interest. But that's not really what the old fox is doing at all. What he is doing is indicating how though Sophia is coming, or maybe has come already, and yet very few people pay attention to it. And if you look carefully at the various figures who are all sort of pushing each other around inside the temple, then you see that you discover various people, because he has basically drawn glorified cartoon characters of many people whom he knew and who were there. Among them, Sigmund Freud, who is looking away, he's not looking at Sophia at all, and various others. Let's say, I think there is Nietzsche, there's all kinds of famous people of that time who are all in that temple, and apparently, major transcendental event has happened. Sophia has come back, but they either don't know about it or don't want to know about it, and they are just going about their own squabbles and what they consider their own work. So you can see that the prediction is there. Yes, she's coming, but who is going to pay attention to her? Which is probably a fairly accurate prophecy. Very, very fine picture, and it'll be here for you to see next time, because that those folio sized red books are heavy as a heck. And while when the book came out, I was still a lot younger and I could pick it up, but now I try to carry it, I end up on the floor, so we will have to be careful with it and ask some helpers to come with me, and then we'll bring it in and display it here. But this is a full page, beautiful, big picture. All right. Now, let's then see what we are dealing with here. And obviously, at least between these two circumstances, the large picture in the, and the picture also has, well, you will see it, but it has inscriptions along the, what would be the frame of the picture. And I haven't looked at it now in several months, but the inscriptions are in several languages. You have Greek, you have Latin, you have probably Hebrew. In any event, all around are inscriptions, and the inscriptions are very simple, and they are just sort of to the effect, this is Sophia who has come back, and a few quotations from the wisdom literature of the Bible, and so forth, very nicely and clearly done. So it obviously was done by Jung himself and not somebody who got in on the act, which can also happen. In any event, those I think are all good enough proofs, good enough indications that Jung was indeed very much a believer in the return of Sophia, and he represented it pictorially for the delectation of his readers and those who watched the pictures in his book. So we have a great deal of proof, let us say, to that effect. Now, we need to maybe say a few more words before I come to some of the passages here, indicating that there is no clear statement that I know of in any of the ancient Gnostic literature saying that Sophia, the wisdom, is going to return to Earth. So let's say the earlier statements and earlier prophecies don't refer to this. However, it is there. So we might say that if we want to look at it that way, that a new revelation, a new prophecy, a new foretelling of something that may happen in the future came about while Jung was writing the Red Book. And of course there is a whole chapter in the Red Book that is prophetic and that foretells the next few hundred years when the new age, the new aeon, as Jung calls it, comes about. Very interesting material, and that you know, we can go into it another time, but it indicates that there will be three ages coming, and they are war, what's wrong with me except old age? In any event, war, magic, and religion. That there would be three, and each one of them several centuries long, and that let's say the spiritual history of the world would consist of these things. That first, now again, I don't want to go into a lot of interpretation here, but just I'll just throw out that when Jung says war, even though he was an officer in the Swiss army himself, in the medical corps, and so forth, it doesn't mean that it is a physical prophecy, but it means that some kind of a contention, a warlike condition, or maybe several wars in different parts of the world put together would come in this new age, And this in turn, combined with the Sophia picture, indicates that the figure of Sophia, of the divine wisdom, would be likely to manifest and perhaps put an end to the more desirable conditions such as the war. Now, as to war, magic, and religion, is difficult to interpret, but of course there are occasional references to these elsewhere, and people had even tried to figure as to how many years each of these prophecies would take, because that chapter in the Red Book, even though it's not very long, is definitely a prophetic chapter. It was, this prophecy 1, prophecy 2, prophecy 3. So it is definitely regarded as prophecy in the sense that most people understand it, that it is foretelling the future. So obviously these are prophetic statements, or they're intended as prophetic statements. Now let's look at it a little further, because in order to place these kinds of prophetic or transcendental statements of Jung into a proper setting, into a proper context, it is important to have some knowledge of the more transcendental, more mystical passages and statements in various books of Jung, because obviously he's referring to at prophetic material that would synchronize with what many of the things that he had already uttered and written. And what he had uttered and written was definitely the fact that there would be considerable changes in the mental, in the ideal statements of C.G. Jung about the future and what went on. That these were definitely uttered by Jung, and they return again and again. That there is first, and some people, of course, right away started trying to figure out by way of how many years it would take for these various statements. So we'll take a look at that next time again. But I think that is probably somewhat premature. But in any event, the three prophecies, or the prophecy about the three ages, indicates that Jung was convinced that there would be big changes in the thought world of the world, and that these changes in turn would come. The first one he characterizes as war, and I don't know whether that indicates a physical war or not. My first reaction to it when I saw it in the Red Book, I said, oh dear, I mean, haven't we had enough war? First World War, Second War already, so what kind of a war are you talking about? But then it also occurred to me that this war could be the war of ideas, the war of ideologies, the war of revolutions and counter-revolutions, and not necessarily war of a major development. Of course, when the Ukrainians and the Russians did us the favor of starting a war not so very long ago, then I thought to myself, oh my gosh, no, not that. But as you can see, apparently the martial aspect of that conflict is likely to go away. But let us say, and as to how to that relates an age of magic, and ultimately the coming of the new religion. This is, here we can really just engage in some more or less educated guessing. But it would seem, and of course there are a lot of people working on that now, and the great editor of the Red Book, Dr. Shamdasani, never indicated as to when in the current or coming world history these prophetically foretold ages, the age of war, the age of magic, and the age of religion would occur. Although people have speculated, and they said that the first one, the first age would probably be about 200 years after Jung wrote the book. But even then, I don't know. I think that's a figure, and I wouldn't consider it to be of a very authentic interpretation of the prophecy. But now, what I think what we have is that the nearest period of time in the history of our world would be characterized by conflict. Now, this conflict doesn't have to be necessarily with rockets and atom bombs and things of that sort, but it could be a conflict of the mind. And I would say to that extent and degree we are right in it. Because I say I lived in the United States since 1952. That's when I set foot on New York Harbor. I would interpret that as saying that what initially was a reasonably placid and peaceful social situation, at least in America, but also in many others, has changed into a battlefield, if not hopefully of weapons as yet, but at least of the ideas and ideologies of the people. So that a war, certainly a war in the minds of people is definitely here. And having lived through a big world war myself, I can testify to it that such conflicts in our world are often brought to the surface by things that go in the minds of people, such as the ideology of the Nazis during the beginning of World War II, and the ideology of Stalin and his buddies later on. So in any event, ideas can fight with each other. And one hopes that belligerent situation does not devolve into a actual conflict of weapons, although it very often may do so. So in any event, we don't know whether the foretold period of war is happening already, is about to happen, has happened already, will be happening or not. These are really all purely conjectural, but the timing of it can be to some extent deduced, and some of you may do that because other people have, on the basis of a picture. Because the chapter headings, if you can call them that, of the Red Book usually have a fairly large-sized painting on the top. And so does the chapter that has the prophecy. And first I would try to figure out what is it? Is it just a kind of a cosmological statement? But it'll be here, you can see it. But I have come to the conclusion, and Dr. Shamdasani agrees with me, that what it is a statement of the future. And the way you can find out why it is the future is because the painting is sort of in stratifications. And the highest stratification are the signs of the zodiac next to each other. And first I didn't recognize that. First among the signs of the zodiac that is up there, with a lot of light shining on it, is the age of Aquarius. So the indication is that the world is moving into a new zodiacal age, which historically usually are about 2,500 years, and that's what he's talking about. Because you have all these signs of the zodiac up in the picture, and then you have a strange light coming out that illuminates one. And that's the one it illuminates. So that it is highlighted, this is what we are talking about. Okay? So in any event, the predictive, prophetic nature of his statements about the future, I think is fairly clear. So now then, that being the case, we will have the Red Book here, and I'll read from the Red Book itself about the threefold division of this prophecy. But right now, what we need to keep in mind, and I hope you are not going to be disappointed, because we'll come back to the prophetic material again, that I need to a little bit explain as to why Jung would have digressed or not digressed into this kind of world prophetic material, and for that matter, fairly early in his career, although he was already associated with Freud. And then, since in the Red Book, as I mentioned, very soon after these prophecies, or in conjunction with these prophecies, is the great big picture of the return of Sophia, which is just imagery. But the writings on the border of the picture in several languages indicate that this is Sophia, and that and with various biblical and even from other religions, even Quranic and Hebrew scriptural quotations indicates that this is wisdom, this is Sophia, this is who is coming. So I think there is very little doubt about that. But now what we need to keep in mind a little, and that's why I bought my book here, about what kind of a context does Jung place the material in the Red Book, or for that matter a lot of his other books? And when we understand that, then we come a little bit closer to perhaps what could be said to be going on. And one of these elements is that somewhat like Blavatsky, in a much more elaborate way, and at an earlier period, because Jung was born in the year when Blavatsky and Olcott and Judge and various other people founded the Theosophical Society in New York City in 1875. 1875 must have been a portentous year, because one great authority who was the greatest Kabbalist in modern times, Eliphas Levi, the Frenchman, died in 1875. Jung was born in 1875. The Theosophical Society, which I do consider, without prejudice, I think, a very important development, a very important movement that started in the late 19th century, was founded in 1875. So now, just like Blavatsky, Jung brought into his psychology very early, and somewhat to the distaste of Freud, he brought in, let's say, a teaching that there are several grades of humanity in the world. And he used really the nomenclature and the terminology, the concepts, very largely of the ancient Greeks. You got to remember that both Jung and Freud were pretty good classical scholars, because you couldn't go to school in those days if you didn't learn Latin and Greek. So they were. And in this case, says that there is the human who is primarily physical in orientation, and and he calls them, I think, by the ancient Greek name of not Heletics, which is the Gnostic statement, but a very, very similar one, and those are the people whose circle of interest, who address themselves in this world primarily to physical things and physical phenomena. That's the lowest, so to say. Then there is the next one, which addresses itself primarily to feeling phenomena, and that there it enters the picture that's very crucial for our purposes, because he says first we have body, and then we have psyche. What is the psyche became a buzzword in the psychoanalytic and psychological world ever since the year 1900, and it means, it's the Greek word for soul. So we have body, soul, and then we have the third one, which is spirit. And the Greek name for spirit is what?
Pneuma.
That's right, pneuma. See, when I forget something, I can call on others. Pneuma. P-N-E-U-M-E. That's why, for instance, this is very unrelated, but I'll mention it just the same, that when the automobiles came to Europe and things of that sort, the air-filled well, what do you call the rubber thing that makes the car run? The tires, yeah. So the tires were regarded as pneumatic because they were running on air. And what is air but spirit? And then, so that is, and then there is beyond that, as Jung put it, there is this is soul, you might say, what that I just mentioned. But beyond the soul, then there is pneuma, the pneuma that we just mentioned, the spirit. So it's body, soul, and spirit, and that the task of humanity is to rise from a primarily physical orientation, which subsequently Jung called extroverted, to an orientation or to the mind, to the psyche, and then pneuma, the spirit. So when we understand that, I'd say it was foundational in Jung's thinking that there was not just psyche, not just a mind personality, but something beyond that, which ultimately he connected with the function, let's say, the transcendent function. So there is one, because the others are the physical is sensation, the mental and cognitive one is thinking, the feeling one is emotion, but then there is yet another, and that other can take the individual to a contact with actually the pneuma, the spirit, and that this really to rise throughout these and to develop a living relationship through these various functions with the invisible world is really the great calling of the human. And I think Jung went on record once saying that the problem with most people is that they have no contact with their own spirit. If they had contact with their own spirit, they would have a much easier relationship relating to the transcendence, to the greater spirit, to the Spirit of God. But if they get stuck in the thinking function, or in the feeling function, or even worse, in the sensate function, then you might say you're stuck. You're not going anywhere. And that this is an extremely important issue. Now, I thought that I found here in my own book, of course, some quotations. This is the hardcover original edition of my book, The Gnostic Jung and the Seven Sermons to the Dead. And I will... excuse me?
When did you publish it?
I'll tell you all that if you wish. Right? No. Of course, it's falling apart already, but what else do you expect? Okay, let's see about There must be some. Yeah. Okay, this is the copyright is in 1982. The first edition is also 1982. And then from there it goes, and they have been right up to the present day, there have been subsequent editions. So now, I have here a chapter that largely consists of references to and quotations to a book by a lady analyst in New York, and let me see, in any event. You know, so now and then it occurs to me that maybe I'm too old for this job, when I can't even find the... Okay. Oh yeah, it's from here. So these are in turn extracts from a very, very wise and very fine writer who was a New York Jungian. Her name should be in here somewhere. Let's see. In any event, that doesn't make a great deal of difference, but she starts out with the excuse me. Okay, here we are. These are several conclusions that the author draws from the corpus of the then available works by Jung. And so I'll mention some of these. The first conclusion is that a pneumatic, spiritual, or more than personal element is an organic part of the human psyche. The ancient Gnosis declared that the human being is not merely a creature of materiality and of a personal mind-emotion complex, psyche, but that there is a third potency, including the soul, which is spirit, pneuma. It is upon the awakening of this element into effective action that gnosis depends. Jung stated something very similar when he declared that the unconscious material of human beings inevitably reveals evidences of the highest spiritual potentiality. The spiritual component is a source of revelations, insights, and ultimately of the urge toward wholeness. So there is a potential of transcendent vision in each human, which, if properly developed, eventually leads to higher insight. The second conclusion is that the spiritual element carries out an act, this is now the pneuma, carries on an active dialogue until the personal element of our selfhood, or with the personal element of our selfhood, through the use of symbols. In other words, the the spirit, the pneuma, is talking to us already. But it is talking to us not in words over living language, but it is speaking to us through symbols. The spiritual element is not a silent partner in the business of life, but demands active participation in the growth and transformation of the individual. Unlike the mind-emotion complex, the pneumatic component does not express itself in words or in ordinary feelings. Dreams, visions, altered states of consciousness, and what Jung called synchronistic experiences are the most important avenues for these symbolic manifestations. And of course, you may detect already by now that all of this has, among other things, also quite a bit to do between the differences that arose between Freud's psychology and Jung's psychology. Because in Freud's psychology, the content of the unconscious has a primarily earthly, instinctual and sexual orientation. But in Jung's psychology, that is not the case. That is merely a lower realm. And so what you have here is the ability of the human to rise higher and higher in this regard, and here we are, that the pneumatic, the spiritual, or more than personal element is an organic part of the human psyche. So as the ancient Gnostics declared that the human being is not merely a creature of materiality and of a personal mind-emotion complex, and that is the proper definition of psyche, but that there is a third potency indwelling the soul, which is spirit, pneuma, P-N-E-U-M-A. It is upon the awakening of this element into effective action that gnosis depends. Jung stated something very similar when he declared that the unconscious material of human beings inevitably reveals evidences of the highest spiritual potentiality. The spiritual component is a source of revelation, insight, and ultimately of the urge toward wholeness. So that, let's say, quite early in Jung's career, these recognitions came to him that the human psyche is much richer, much wider than we imagine, and the human psyche in turn contains a transcendental spiritual element. I'm always reminded in this respect, although I'm not a Bible Christian, no laughter, no. It's the Sunday evening preachers who always pronounce it the Bible, the Bible, the Bible. And of course I decided that means that they are babbling, in any way. So, but something is there already of the highest spiritual potentiality. The spiritual component is a source of revelations, insight, and ultimately of the urge toward wholeness, which of course was Jung's expression for achieving the desirable, higher and transcendentally infused source of consciousness. Things like the higher self that the Theosophy speaks about, and which points toward a transcendental and spiritual nature. Another conclusion is that this spiritual element carries on an active dialogue with the personal element of our selfhood through the use of symbols. The spiritual element is not a silent partner in the business of life. I mentioned before dreams, visions, so forth. The third conclusion is that the symbols proceeding from the pneumatic components of the soul reveal a path of spiritual or psychological development which can be traced not only backward toward the cause in the past, which is Freud's method, let's see, not only backward toward the cause in the past, but forward in a goal in the future. And so here is a confluence of Jung's statements with Gnostics, and that is why I brought some of them forward, and we'll bring them forward in the future. So now what we need to keep in mind here is something really fairly important, and that is that we have already within us, without raising any kundalini, without meditating till the cows come home, or whatever maybe, we already have within us an aspect of our inner being. And this aspect of our inner being is of transcendental origin, has the capacity to lead us toward more and more transcendence, and ultimately to lead us to a spiritual fulfillment. Now, there Jung had his own ways of explaining it, because one thing that he said quite early in his career was that on the face of it, as you deal with human beings, the problem with them is that they are not united. Their psyche runs off in all kinds of directions. And therefore, something has to happen to bring about a greater union, a greater cohesion, a greater purposefulness in the human, at which time then the progress toward transcendence by way of the transcendent functions and so forth can happen. Before that, you will have sensation. These are, the functions of the ego, and ego incidentally means I, ego, this and that, so the ego, but Jung always held from the beginning that there is a deeper and a transcendent function. And if we work on that, and if we perform the necessary exercises and learn enough of the symbolism, then we can get closer and closer to this higher being. So what he's really saying there is very, very much what various spiritual philosophies, including Christian mysticism, including Theosophy, including Sufis and various people, have held for a long time. that if we address ourselves to it and keep working at it, then we can become not only better than we are now, because that's merely a moral statement. What's better? What's better in one place is maybe not better in another place. But we can become more. And this more, in turn, is signified by an interior quality of wholeness. So that where we are now most of the time is that the various, let's say there was a word for it which will come to me in a minute perhaps, the various part selves. That was a German word for it. We have part self, we have an intellectual part self, we have an emotional part self, we have a selfish part self, and that these part selves have to learn how to harmonize with each other, how to unite, and then join in the greatest and the ultimate task, which is to reach transcendence. Transcendence of what? Transcendence of what we are doing here on earth, transcending the physical, transcending the emotional, transcending the mental. And then, as we move through the path of the psyche, we arrive to a position where that transcendence is possible and where we become related to and united with an ultimate source from whence we have come to begin with. So the issue is indeed not evolution, as I so often try to remind my fellow theosophists of, but the issue is transformation. And the transformation is being transformed from a being that is primarily motivated by physical, by emotional, by intellectual factors. We are moved to a different area of cognition and action. And this different area is where the division between the immanent, as we might call it philosophically, and the transcendent are. So we are a curious being. That is perhaps why the ancients often represented the cosmic man, the great man. It is a very beautiful painting of that in the Manly Hall's big book also. He stands in the water. He moves through the air. He gets into the sunlight and he goes higher and higher because in him these various cosmic factors are present and they are really all there for the ultimate purpose of raising him above ordinary life and of achieving real wholeness, which includes transcendence. So if you are not aware of your own transcendent function, if you don't have the ability to call upon it and to utilize it, then you are partial. And so we are all, for the most part, partial beings, and we get caught by materialism, we get caught by sensuality, we get caught by intellectual obsessions, but they are all a partial expression of reality. So, this is very philosophical, but important to remember. Until we are able to relate meaningfully. By meaningful, I mean here that derive meaning from it. Until we derive meaningfully, derive meaning from our experiences in the physical world, in the emotional world, in the intellectual world, and ultimately in the intuitive world. That's what in theosophy is often called Buddhi. Until we do that, we are. Well, I am not a great knower of physics or of cars or things like that, but we are not firing on all cylinders, if I may say. I hardly know what that means. Never drove a car in my life. No. But we are functioning on a very small part of our capacity. And if you possess or are developing a certain amount of self-knowledge, then occasionally this will come to you and catch you. I remember when it first called me, it said, "Oh, all right, so we are talking about one or two other people. I can relate to them physically by the way of looks. I can relate to them emotionally. I can relate to them mentally. But can I get beyond? Can I get to something deeper?" And so I was kind of setting that objective to myself. And then once something happened. I don't know what. It wasn't anything that I did, that's another great fallacy, that everything that happens to us is done by us. No, not really. It's a much more complex issue. In any event, all of a sudden I was aware of, I think, the radiance and the power of the innermost self of somebody with whom I was speaking. And I said, "Oh my God, look at that. A luminous being, like a shining angel in this person." And once you had that kind of an experience with somebody, your relationship to that person changes also too. However, I'm warning you, it may not last. And later on, these same people whom you saw in such a glorified shape may act toward you in an other than very glorious manner. And then you have big disappointment. And then you have to remember that you are not, these experiences are not enduring. They don't just go on. But that you should learn from them what you should. You should learn from them that there is such a thing, that there is an other being there is an angelic self, there is a higher self, and that you got a glimpse of it. Maybe it was just a big blaze of light, maybe it was something else, but you had a glimpse of it. So try to recall not just an image. Some of us are kind of very visually minded. I always like to see stuff, even if it wasn't very pleasant to look at, but still, but generally to go to the, as much as possible, go to the deepest part, the essence of this other person. And if we can, even just a few times, I assure you the experience will be worth it. And that is, one time it was explained to me, it may be likened to a stairway or a ladder. You are climbing, then you get to a certain point where the ladder doesn't end, but it has reached a level that is very different from before. And then you begin to see what you have done. You see that you have risen, you see that you have moved, that you have transformed, and that is the time to give thanks. Let's put it. And you know, if you study comparative religions, that used to be called, I think now it's just called religious studies. I never know what kind of professor I was. Was I the one or the other? But I was doing what I could just the same. When we come to that point, then we can penetrate more deeply and come to the higher portion of that stairway where a certain kind of transformative understanding comes to you. An understanding, it's very interesting to begin to learn how to understand without all the assisting agencies that we avail ourselves with here. But all of a sudden, you understand. It didn't come through the intellect. It didn't come through your feelings. It did not come through sensation. Although you know all of these things are connected with each other, and this is, for instance, where a lot of the spiritual traditions, including the Western spiritual tradition, have shown us that the cultivation of beauty, the cultivation of the representational arts, as it was practiced in the time of the Renaissance and so forth, can produce tremendous results. And it should also teach us that when we find ourselves in a situation that is mostly characterized by ugliness, then maybe something ought to be done, you know, because the greater, the better, the more instructive, the more influential, the more transformative elements of our lives are always beautiful, are always transfigurative, are elevating. It's almost hard to find another word for it. And here I think is one of the great faults of our culture, that we have to a great extent have lost contact with that. Because we need to do some things that bring the various portions of us together, that will reconcile our thinking with our feeling, that will recognize our desires with our higher intuitions and so forth. So, and by doing that, what happens? We become united. We become one. We are no longer one self here, another self there, a third self there. And this is of considerable and great importance. Jung recognized that. And that's why he immediately, practically from the beginning of his analytical practice, brought forth the idea that what needs to happen is for the human to become fully human, in other words, to grow up in a spiritual sense, to become what we are trying to become, and not be satisfied with lesser overlay. I'm a very great guy because I made a lot of money. Oh yeah, really? Well, you know what? And a lot of people have made a lot of money and they were not very great people, and so on and so forth. So that the issue is to become an indivisible unity. So that I'm trying to come up with some example of that. But let's say, the perpetual intersection, the perpetual antagonism between anger and love. Those are two of the bigger emotions in life. So now the question is, can you be angry at somebody and still love them at the same time? I think that there was somebody walking around in Palestine there a while ago who said that. You can't do that. Don't yield to the anger is a component. I don't think you can hang around any people for any length of time without getting good and angry at them, because we evoke that sort of thing. But just because we evoke it, that doesn't mean we have to live with it. And so, we should be careful to remember, look, sure, this person makes me mad, but you know what? There is something inside of them. And if I try hard, I can discern it, I can feel it, I can touch it. And that something is lovable. And perhaps if you, are within a monotheistic religious mythos, then you can see that maybe there is somebody, maybe there is some incredibly large, incredibly wise, and immensely good being who loves this person and who also loves me, and that therefore we ought to love each other. And when we become irritated with each other, when we become, let's say, pushed around by the exigencies of the moment, then we forget that. And then maybe the door of our personality will always be open and say, if you come with good feelings, if you come with genuine needs, if you come with goodness, then you're welcome, and this door will be open to you. And the strange thing is with that is that people will understand that. When you have that kind of an atmosphere in a place, I have been in a few of them, you come in and you get the feeling, oh dear, what is this person? I'm really welcome, And the real welcome comes from the connection of the unity of the soul. And this is, of course, also what Jung referred to as individuation, because we are now indivisible beings. The trouble with us is that much of the time we are divided, Oh, I don't like what you said, or I liked what you have said. This is here and there running into all kinds of directions. But that is not the way to be. We have to be one, and if we are one, then somehow that ultimate oneness, that in a strange and mysterious and not at all understandable ways has brought us here, will be with us, will assist us, and will bring us further and further on the great stairway of being, what the French tradition referred to as l'escalier des sages, the Yeah, the step of the step of the wise, the steps of the wise, and it is possible, but there are certain ways, certain actions have to be performed, and this was really, maybe some Jungian analyst would hit me on the head with a frying pan, if Jungian analysts indeed have frying pans, and say that, I'm falsifying the teachings. But Jung's all perpetual striving for people was for wholeness, unity. And that wholeness and that unity is the closest that we can come in this life, I think, to the transcendent. Because one thing about the transcendent, at least in my opinion, is it is whole, it is complete, it is total, it lacks nothing. And that is how God and the gods have been defined of old. And so let's try to keep these things in mind. Let us try to practice them in our own life, and in so doing, the ultimate purpose of human life can be accomplished, which is become one, even as our Father in heaven is one. To become united, even as the sky and the moon and the sun and the planets are working together, so can we be, and we can thereby benefit others. Madame Blavatsky over and over indicates in various writings that what is so important is the compassion, the closeness in feeling, the recognition of our relationship to others. In Christianity, we find it expressed as brotherhood, and so it is in various other places. So once we get close to that which is not only psyche, but is the pneuma, is the spirit, once the shining hand of the spirit touches our shoulder, and everything changes. Everything gets better, and everything has a purpose. May that day come to us soon, and may we remember that way in the mountains of Switzerland, a stocky little doctor, C.G. Jung, discovered these things, rediscovered them, and brought them to us now in a psychological guise, so that we may be able to approach it from several angles, and by so approaching it may accomplish what we have come in this world to accomplish. So I thank you very much, and we'll continue. Next time I'll have the red book here, and we'll look at the prophecies. So thanks very much.